Hello once again. Welcome to Zephyr's BI and Analytics, where we learn by building BI project. This is the final part to our Aurora Bank report. If you've not seen part 1 and part 2, you can actually check on the channel. You'll find part 1 and part 2 videos. Now, I'm going to be making this as short as possible. This is the last video, so I'm going to be making it as short as possible. I'll just walk you through what you need to do to get a complete report. Now, remember from what I said before, we're looking at the financial health and everything we had on the demographics, right? Everything we had on these demographics here was also speaking to the financial health. We just needed to change what we have as total client to total debt. Exactly. So remember, on your financial health now, you need to make a lot of changes. This is no longer looking at clients anymore, rather it's looking at total debt by age group. So it's just a simple change, changing client to debt. This is now speaking to total debt by age group. So do the same change for every other thing you have here, right? I want to make this video as short as possible, and I also want you to try a lot of things out so that I don't keep repeating what I've done before. So change all this. This is no longer looking at clients, rather we're looking at debt. Just change this to debt. Now, I remember saying the card visual, so the clients remain the same, but here we're looking at average risk score, and here we're looking at debt to income ratio, and here we're looking at total debt. Yes, I have my card already. This is the total debt. Remember, we created a measure for total debt before now. Now, we're not looking at the single max debt and the single minimum debt, right? So I'm just going to show you those two measures so you can actually have them on your own end. So we have the measure for total debt. Now we also want to represent the single max debt and the single mean debt. So let me just quickly show you that. So for the max debt, right? This is the max debt. We've been writing this query before now. I'm sure we've written it before now. So it's just saying the max, then we're referring to the debt column. Remember, the debt column is on our users, dimension users. So if we go to our table view, let's quickly look at our dimension users. This is our dimension users data. We actually have the total debt on this table. Look at the total debt here. So we're just saying what is the max debt we have in this column and what is the mean debt. Now, ideally, you will see that the mean debt is 0, but I actually made a small modification to the measure to show us the mean debt that is greater than 0. So let's go back. So this is the max debt. I've showed you that already. This is the max debt. We've written that measure over and over again. Now we're looking at the mean debt. The mean debt, I'm only applying a filter context. This is a filter, just applying a filter to say, okay, I want the total debt, but I want once it's greater than 0. So give me the minimum debt that is greater than 0. So I don't want 0 as the minimum. Just give me the minimum that is greater than 0. That's what this measure is just doing. So once I'm through with these two, I now need to apply these two to my that's my total debt card. So I'll select my total debt, right? I would now come to reference label like we've done before. I want to add to my reference label. What do I want to add? The max debt and the mean debt. Max, then I'll look for the mean debt, that's all. So let's quickly format this. I'll just format this. You'll be able to format the rest. So I'll come back to this visual reference label, right? When it's on all, I'll just quickly change the style. Remember, we're using DIN, and the font size is actually 16. Remember, 16 not 17. Then the value, I'll expand the values also, change the font style, increase the size to also 16, right? Then I'll come back again and change this to max debt. This is where I now apply a custom name, right? This is no longer max debt. I will say this should be single, right? Max debt, right? Then make it this way. Now, the value, I wanted the value to be red, right? So all I need to do is just expand the value and come here and just change it to red. Just give it any red color, give it your own red color. So this applies to the value. Now, I'll come back to this select label, change this to mean debt, right? Now, the feed name, I also want it to be a custom name. So I'll type here single mean debt. That's all. Then yeah, the debt is still debt. It's still a bad thing. So I also want to make it just the value to be read. So that's how you're going to apply the color. You're going to apply the color to the reference label and all that. So once I'm done with that, the next one you need to apply to, you need to change, you need to do your own card. It's for the debt to income ratio. So for the debt to income ratio, remember on our table view, right? We already have the debt to income ratio here. We have it here, DTI, that's the debt to income ratio. Look at it, we've calculated this before now, our debt to income ratio. We've done this before now. But what I also did was, I wrote another measure for debt to income ratio. It's the same measure, it's the same principle. So this was my debt to income ratio. Let me show you that measure. This is DTI. So this was my measure for my debt to income ratio, yeah? This is the measure for the debt to income ratio. It's the same principle. We're simply summing the total debt divided by the total yearly income. This is our debt to income ratio. So now that I have the measure representing the debt to income ratio, the only thing I did was, now I want the single max debt to income ratio and mean debt to income ratio. Same principle. Now this is the max DTI. The max DTI is same thing. Max DTI, right? Max DTI. This DTI is referring to the column. Is referring to the column. That's the DTI column on the user's data. Then we also have the mean DTI here. Mean DTI. So it's as simple as ABC. So you need to then create your card visual also. Just replace this card I have here. If I want to do that now, I'll simply just come to format, right? I'll remove this that's the income. I'll replace it with DTI. Exactly. So this is the DTI. I'll replace it with DTI. Okay, let me be sure. Why am I getting 1.3, 1.39? Nope, that's not true. It's not supposed to be so. Okay. Okay. So it's supposed to be in percent, right? Yeah, it's supposed to be in percent, but I don't want it to appear in percent, so I want it to appear in what is it called? I want it to appear in a number form, in a value form. So if I multiply by 100, it's going to give me this value in form of a number, not percent. It's also the same percent. I think this is about 139%. So if I multiply by 100, I'm supposed to get 139 exactly. 139. So it's just a simple modification I did to that. I think I'm going to leave some of these DAX measures. I'm going to also update them on the link to the OneDrive. I'll just put them there so you can easily just look at them if you just want to see them there. So once you have this debt to income ratio, right? This, of course, you need to format this to look exactly like this. Just stay on it. The colored value is actually, when you change it to DTI, remember the colored value is actually 30. This is 30, right? So you then add the reference label. The reference label now is now referring to the max DTI. Remember, this max DTI is referring to the DTI in our user's data, then the mean DTI also. Simple as ABC. So you do that. You also do that for risk score. Risk score, we've already done that. So all you need to do is write a measure to calculate the average risk score. Then, of course, you now need another measure for max risk score and mean risk score. So that settles everything we need to do about financial health. So you can just do that and you're good to go with financial health. From financial health, we then move to creating, that's the next page of the report that is looking at transactions. Let me quickly navigate to the report we're trying to recreate. So this is the report we're trying to recreate. The next page we're going to now is transactions. Transactions. So the transactions is looking at our fact transaction table. That's our fact transaction table. So I'll quickly just run you through everything I did here. It's simple. So like I said, I want this video to be as short as possible. So I'll run you through everything I did here for the transactions. So one of the things we are quickly going to do for our transactions, let's quickly navigate back to our report. Great. Remember to also change the titles here. You can look at the report, change the titles you have here also. Now, I'm just going to make a duplicate of this, right? I'll right click and say duplicate. So once I have this done, for the transactions, we actually don't need this. I'll just remove this. I'll remove this. I'll also remove this. I'll remove these visuals we have here. I'll remove everything. I'll remove all the visuals. I'll remove all the visuals we have here. We don't need this also. We don't need this. We don't need this also. Now, I remember that we actually just have two card visuals for the transactions. So I'll quickly navigate to the PowerPoint we created. We created a separate background for our transaction. This is actually our transaction background because we have just two icons, right? So I'm going to quickly take a snapshot of this. I'll just come and take a snapshot of this. I'll save it and replace it with the one I have in Power BI. So I'll snap this, right? I'll snap this now and I'll save. I think I'll save it in my desktop. That's fine. Yes, you can replace it. I'll close. Now navigate back to Power BI, not this. I'll navigate back to this. So I'll quickly come to background. I'll remove this one we have here, replace it with the one I just saved now. Yes, this should be fit. Great. Now, for our transactions, we're only focusing on two things. We want to know the total amount, transaction amount, and the total number of transactions. So if you come to our table view here and look at our transaction data, you actually see this is the ID, which is the number of transactions. So if we do a count of the ID to tell us the number of transactions, then this is the amount, which is the each transaction, the amount attached to each transaction. Then finally, we have one column here that shows error. So if it's blank, it simply means the transaction went through, there were no errors. Now, if you click on the drop down, you actually see that you have blank for those transactions that went through, there were no errors. Then you actually have some other errors display here. So one thing we'll quickly do now is add a new column here. This new column I simply want to add is just to refer to status if the transaction failed or the transaction passed through. So I'll just refer to this column as status, right? And I'll say if, right? If the fact transaction error is equal to blank, right? If it's blank, then I want to say the transaction passed, else the transaction failed. So if it's blank, the transaction passed. If it's not, that means it failed. So you can actually see for every time you see blank, you see pass. Now let's quickly go create our card visuals. We only have a few measures to create here. The first measure will be the count of the transaction. So I'll just right click on our DAX measure here, say new measure. Now we want to count our transactions, right? We also want to count our failed and passed transactions. So this should simply be total transactions, right? This is referring to the number of transactions, so I'll just use this to indicate that. So this can be a distinct count or a count, whichever one, but let's just say distinct count to be on the safe side of the transaction ID. So this is the total transaction, number of transaction, not the amount now, number of transaction. Next, let's quickly then create another measure for total transaction amount. Total transaction amount. So we'll create a new measure now. Total transaction amount. So this would be a sum, right? A sum of the fact transaction amount. So fact transaction amount. Yeah. So this would be a sum of the fact transaction amount. Now, we also want to know the number of failed transaction in terms of amount and number. That's failed and passed transaction in terms of amount and number. So I'll simply create another measure and we refer to this measure as failed transaction. This can be failed, right? This indicates number. Now I'll say calculate. This is where we employ the calculate function. We already have the total transaction. That's the number of transaction, right? We want it where the status is equal to failed. Great. So I'll just make a copy of this, right? I'll make a copy of this. We've done this before. Next, we need to create for the number of transactions that went through, which is pass. So I'll paste this. This is no longer failed. This is pass. Then this is no longer failed. This is also pass. Great. So this is for the number. So let's go look at the amount also. So I'll just right click. We need to create two more measures. So this is referring to the failed amount, right? So we can just use the dollar sign to indicate this is referring to amount. So I'll come here. This is no longer, this is referring to amount. So this is total transaction amount. Then of course, when the status is failed, is failed. Then finally, I need to create one more for pass. I'll just right click, new measure. Finally paste this. So this should refer to pass, and this should also be pass. Great. So I think I made a mistake with one of the spellings here. Let me just quickly correct that. That is referring to transactions here. So this is total transaction. Okay. So good. We are good. Now we have the transaction amount, the ones that pass in terms of number. And so let's quickly apply that to, so this card visual now, this should be, this is no longer debt. So what we're talking about here is total transaction. So transaction, this is total transactions. So you can actually use the dollar sign to represent the amount, right? Total transaction in amount. So I'm going to select this card visual once more. I'll come to format. This is build actually. So we're no longer looking at total debt. Rather, we're looking at total transaction amount. This is the amount. Great. So I'll come to call out value once more. I'll change this to transaction amount. Remember, we're using 30 as the font size. I'll scroll down. Display unit should be none, right? Decimal places should be 0. Then label should be off. One thing I'll do is select the total transaction now and add the dollar sign. That's the total transaction amount. Next, I'll come to reference label, right? I would add, what am I adding now? On the DAX measure, I'm going to add the past transaction. That's the past transaction dollar, right? And I also add the failed transaction dollar. Great. So I'll simply come down, change the font style to DIN. Let's be consistent. Increase the font size to 16, like we've always done. Expand the value. Increase the font size to 16, like we've always done also. Next, I'll come to the select label for pass. So this should refer to custom. This should just be pass. I'll just say pass, right? Next, I'll come to the value. I want this value to be none. I also want the decimal places to be 0, right? Then I also want to attach the dollar sign. So I'll come to the pass dollar and attach the dollar sign. So for the values, quickly, for the values, I want the color to be green. So I'll attach the green color. So this should be green color, right? So you can always choose any green color. So to show that, okay, this transaction went through. Now for failed, I'll come back, change this to failed, right? Then for the custom, I'll just rename this to failed and this. Next, we'll come to the values also. Now the display unit should be none. Decimal places, I also want it to be non-zero. Then, of course, I want the failed dollar. I also want to attach the dollar sign, right? And finally, I want the color to be red. That's the value color to be red. Great. So basically, that's our transaction amount. So everything I've done for this transaction amount now, I expect you to do same for the number of transaction. The number of transaction. Everything I've done for the transaction amount, I expect you to do same for the number of transaction. I'll quickly select this, make sure the background is off. So I'll do same for the transaction number. So the number of transactions. So this is no longer going to be client. This is going to be, let's say, total transaction also. I'll just say Ctrl Z. Total transactions, but referring to the number of transactions. So I'll expand this. Great. So do the same thing for the card here. So you know what to do. This is now referring to the number of transactions, right? The number of transactions. That's what this is referring to. So the same principle. You put the total transaction number, then the pass number and field number, and format it this way. Next, let's quickly look at what we have here. So we already have the number of transactions. So what we want to do here is just bring in a donut chart, right? We bring in a donut chart here. I'll collapse this so we can have this bigger. Sorry. We bring in a donut chart here, right? Then what we want to have on the donut chart is just the number of transactions. That's the number, not the amount now. Number of transactions. Then we want to come to our fact table and add the status, right? Status. So the status we created, I'll just add it here. So this shows us the transactions, pass and failed. You can go ahead and format this donut chart. We've done that before. Then we have another donut chart here also. So I'm just going to make a duplicate of this. Control, copy and paste. I'll drop it here. Now, we're also looking at the number of transactions, but we are looking at the number of transactions by use chip, actually use chip. So I'll uncheck status and replace it with use chip. So this will tell us the transaction number of transaction by the use chip. Also, you can go ahead and format this. I think one of the first thing I'll do, select, come to size, put off the background, right? Then come to title, you rename, add your title. Then for the details, you can actually decide to say you want just the category and percent total, right? Category and percent total. If that doesn't work because of the size, we can then say we just want the percent value, that's the percent of total, right? Then for the legend, we can make the legend top center. Let's see if it works. Doesn't really work. Let's put up the title and see. Okay, yep. Or maybe we'll make it bottom. Nope. Let's see, stack left, whichever one that is actually going to be good now. I don't know. So I noticed this now because of what we're trying to do. So one thing I'll quickly do, this is what I'll do to solve this problem. I'll come to table view, right? I'll come to fact transactions, right? Now we're looking at use chip, right? We're looking at use chip. So we have the chip transaction, online transaction, and swipe transaction. So this can actually just be chip, online, and swipe rather than have transaction attached to it. So what's the fastest way to resolve this? We can create a new column and say if it's chip, we should just, if it's chip transaction, it should be chip. If it's online transaction, if it should be online, else it should be swipe. So let's quickly do that. Let's just add a new column and say this column should be use chip. Use chip 2. It should just be use chip 2. And I'll just say switch, right? I'll call on the switch function here and say fact use chip. So first I'll say true, right? So it should be true, right? Fact use chip. Fact use chip. If the use chip is equal to online The spelling must be correct. Transaction, right? How this work? This should be online, right? Next, if I'll just copy this. This is not a good way to write a tax function. So what I'll do is I'll make it clean. Let me make it clean, please. I'll bring this down here, right? Bring this down here. Bring this down here so you get it. Okay. So if the transaction use chip is no longer online, if it's swipe, right? I think we have swipe. So this should be swipe. Then what's the last one again? So we can just refer to the last one as what's the last one? So we have swipe. I'll quickly check that now. Yes, we're going to get an error. It's fine, we'll fix it. Let's just know what we're dealing with here. So we have swipe and we have chip actually. So the last one should be chip. So I'll come back here and just say after this comma, the last one should be chip. So once I'm done, I'll just check this. It's a very simple query. We've done this over and over before now. So you can actually see, okay, so there's a problem. This is online transaction. Let me be sure the spelling is correct. Online, yeah, the spelling is wrong. I missed the S. That's why we're having the issue we're having. So online transactions, because I expect this to be online, not cheap. So let's see if it's going to, yeah. So now we have online. We should have everything in place without any issue. So now we can come back to our report view, right? Instead of using the use chip here, we'll use the one we just created now. And I think now you can see it's actually easier. I think now also you can come back to the details and say you just want the category and percent of total, right? Like this. Then you can turn off the legend. Yeah, so this works. So you can actually assign different colors to this. You can do same for this also. So for this, remember, we're just interested in, let's be sure. So this is the number of transactions. We're just interested in the percent value. So category percent value. Then you can put off, no, not data value, percent total. Then you can also put off the legend. So you can apply the colors you need to apply there. Now, for the chart we have here, right, we just had the bar chart referring to our merchant, right, and the total transaction and the transaction amount. So for us to create that, what we just need is to pick our, so we need a combo, right? We need a combo. So I'll come to the build. We need a combo for that. I'll select that's the clustered column chart and line chart. That's what we need to create this. I'll just bring this here. I'll bring this here. I'll put it here. So what we need is the transaction and the transaction amount by the merchant. So I'll expand our data pane, right? Remember, on our merchant table, we created a category before now. So I'll select the category. Now in our DAX measure, what I'm looking for, now in our DAX measure, the transaction amount will come on the column, right? Now, the number of transactions will come on the line chart. So this is what we are going to have. Very simple. So once you have this done, you just can go ahead and do some formatting to make sure it looks like what I have there. And I'll just give you a hint so this video can be short. So the formatting, one of the things I'm going to do, come to the x-axis, I'll turn off the title, right? Then the y-axis, I'll also turn off the title, right? Next, I'll go to the secondary y-axis, right? I'll put on the values. I'll expand, just change the colors of the values to white. So I'll have this white out of here. And then finally, I'll come to grid line, put it off. You don't need it. Yeah, so the final thing I'm going to do now, remember in column, you can actually assign any color you want to assign here. Change any color, just pick any color of your choice, any color of your choice here to assign to the column, any color of your choice. Now for the line, you can go ahead and also format the line. This is where you get to format the line. If you want a solid line, fine. If you want a dotted line, dash, whichever one you want, just select. The width of the line also, you can select and increase. But my interest is on the data label, right? That's the data label. So when you put on the data label, expand, change this from all, select the transaction amount and put it off. We only want the data label to display the number of transactions. We already know via the y-axis here, the transaction amount. So we just want to know the number of transactions that resulted to this amount we have here. So it's that simple also. You can just go ahead and format this and make it look beautiful. So next, we now want to see a transaction on a monthly basis, right? Transaction on a monthly basis, and we also want to see a time frame for the transaction. So I'll also come again and pick this can be a column, clustered column chart, whichever one. I'll just bring it here, right? Now, what I'm interested in seeing is just the I'll come to the calendar table, right? We have a short month column. This is our short month column. I want to select the short month. I want to see the transaction amount. So on a monthly basis, so the transaction amount, now this is transaction amount, so on a monthly basis, so this is not well sorted. I'll sort this using months, short months, and I'm still not getting it from January to December as I expected. So one of the reasons we're not getting it that way is just to come to this table view, right? Come to your calendar, right? On your calendar, select your month short, this month short. Now sort this month short column by month number. Yeah, sort it by month number. That should fix it. So when we come back to report view now, and you can actually see it's fixed already. Now is sorting from January to December. So we can actually sort from the other way around, ascending order. So we have January to December like this. So the idea is one of these filters here, you have to change one of these filters to year, right? Change one of these filters to year. So for this filter, I'll just remove the yearly income, replace it with year. Okay, so now we can actually see this by 2023. We can see this by 2024. You can see the total transaction amount and all that and all that. So this is cool. So remember to rename this slicer to year, not select yearly income, just select year. And to do that, you know how to do that already. Just select, come to the slicer header. This should just be select year, not select yearly income. Great. So here I had a bookmark, right? I had a bookmark that switches between this transaction, monthly transaction, and the frequency. So one thing also, you can decide to use a line chart for this. Just pick a chart of your choice. Now to do that, remember on the transaction table here, on the transaction table, right? We had the time for the transaction. There's a time for the transaction. So we're going to create a time category, a column, and we're going to categorize this time so that we'll be able to create that. So I'll quickly navigate back to this report I have here. This is what I'm trying to make, right? I would just come to table view, okay, fact transactions. So I have a column here that talks about time category. Great. So time category. I'll just copy this code. So I'll stay a while so you can see the code clearly. It's just categorizing the time. We've done this a couple of times now. I'll just copy this. Get back here. Now, while we're here, I'll just say I want to create a new column. I'll paste the code. Yes, I'm going to get this error because the column name is quite different. So I'll rename this. This is looking at fact. This is it. So I'll close the bracket. I'll just copy this to be a little bit fast. Like I said, I want these videos to be as short as possible. And replace. I think there's a way to do this. I can't remember. Well, I'll find out. So I'll just replace everything we have here. Replace everything we have here. Great. So once this is done, everything is done. I'll also leave this code on the file on the OneDrive, so you don't need to stress yourself. I'll leave the code there. You grab the code there. So I'll just commit this. So guess what? One thing we also need to do again is to create a sort column. So we'll be able to sort this from 6 to 24. That's from 12 a.m. to 9 p.m. or 11:59 p.m. So I'll just copy this once more. I'll say I want to create a new column again. So this is going to be the sort, right? This is going to be the sort. I'll just add sort to this. So guess what I want to do? You remember, I'll just rename this to 1. I'll rename this to 2. Rename this to 3. Rename this to 4. And this will be 5. I'll rename this to 5. And that'll be all. So I'll just commit this now. And I'll stay on the time category and sort it with that column we just created now, the time category sort. So I'll select the time category, right? I'll come to sort column, use the time category sort. Great. So once we're done with this, we can go ahead now and create a matrix using the month and the time category. So I'll just select the matrix, right? I'll select the matrix. I'll select the matrix. I'll bring it here, right? I would expand. So for the matrix, what we need is, so to build the visual, the first thing we need on the short month, we need the short month to be on the row, short month to be on the row. Then we then need the time category we created to be on the column, time category to be on the column. Finally, we can then come to our DAX and add the number of transactions. We're looking at the number, not amount. So number of transaction number. So this, it's done. Then let's quickly format this. To format this now, we'll come to format, right? We'll come to format. First thing I'll do is the layout. I'll change this from default. No, I'll leave it from default. From default, I can say none, right? Then I'll change it from compact to tabular, right? Makes sense. So I'll just adjust this because I want the other time to come down. I'll make adjustments here also. I'll make little adjustments here. I'll make little adjustments here. I'm not planning to select anything. I'll make little adjustments here. Little adjustments here. I'll make another adjustment here. Wait, so I'll just reduce the size once more. Reduce the size here also. Great. So once we're done with this, I'll come to grid, right? I'll just scroll down to options. I think I want to leave the font size on 10. I'll just increase the padding by 1, right? So I'll increase this a bit, increase the padding by 1. I don't know if we can increase the font size. Let's say 11. So I hope this is not so big. I'm not sure we can do 11. So I'll take it back to 10. I'll take it back to 10. Next, I'm going to simply come down to conditional formatting for us to be able to achieve that conditional formatting we did. So first thing, I'll come to specific column. I'll put on everything here and just take the alignment to be the middle. Next, I would come next to cell element. I'll just put on the background color. So you have this conditional formatting. I'll also put on the data bars. Great. So we selected 2023. I would unselect 2023 here. Make sure no year is selected. So we put on the data bars, right? So when we select this and the data bar is actually on, so one thing we'll do for the data bar, just come to the conditional formatting on the data bar. right? I'll say I want to show the bar only, and I want this to apply to the total only, right? So it's requesting for the values, minimum value and maximum value. I'll just bring this here. The minimum value we have here is actually 93127. So I'll just say 9,000, right? The maximum value we actually have here is it's 14,500. So I'll just say 14,500 just to give room, and I'll click on OK. So this will apply only to the total, right? I'll just increase the size a bit. This will apply to the total only. One thing I'll do is come to the total and put off the row total. Yep. So this is exactly what I have on the other end. So you can switch between these two charts here. I'll just put this here. So we have the month, then we have the chart. So I think we can go back to where now? Let's come to grid and come to options. Let's increase the padding once more and see what happens. I think this is okay. So this is great. So one last thing I did was, if you look at the colors we have here, right, we still have some numbers that are quite high and low. So I really wanted to show that. Remember to change this from short month. You can actually just name this month. When you select, you can just come to build, right? Rename this, just remove short. So I don't know if that is really necessary. You can leave it this way, or we can just apply what I want to do now. Remember to rename this page to be transactions, please. To be transactions. So I'll just show you that I've done it in one of my videos before now. So let's come back to this report here, right? So what I basically did was I created my own gradient. So if you come to the DAX here, you would see I have a gradient here. So I created my own gradient using the values we have there, So I also leave this code on the OneDrive. So I'll simply just copy this gradient, right? I'll navigate back to the report now. I'll stay on the DAX. I want to be as fast as I can. New measure. I'll stay on the DAX and I'll paste this code I just copied now. So I'll paste the code. Now, our transaction here, we're referring to the number of transactions, so it doesn't recognize that. So we're referring to the number of transactions here. So this is what we're referring to. So I'll just copy this. Control C. I'll replace it with this. Remember, I'll leave this code on the OneDrive so you can easily use it if you want to. Else, you can actually leave yours just the way it is there. See, okay, you get the same results. This is just to add a little gradient to what we already have. So once you have this done, and this is the code, once I have this written, I'll just commit, right? Okay, now I can select the matrix, right? I'll select the matrix. I'll navigate back to cell element. Then for the background color, I'll click on the conditional formatting. I'll say I don't want to use this gradient anymore. I want to apply my feed values. That's because the feed value we just created now is called gradient. So I'll say I want to apply my own gradient, and I'll click on OK. So that will apply the gradient in a different form. Just you can see it now. So it's a little bit different than the one we had before. So go ahead and add title to this, add title, add every other thing you need to add and all that. I thought I renamed this to month. It didn't work out. So, yeah, so go ahead and add title to this and make it look good. So I'll just talk about the what now? Bookmark. Yeah, bookmark. So I'll just talk about the bookmark button I have here that you can switch between this and the other chart. So to do that is very easy. First, just come to view, right? Select bookmarks, select this selection you have here, those two pane. Bring out the bookmark and the selection pane. So this is what you're going to have. The bookmark should be on, the selection pane is going to be on. Now, what do we want to do? It's very simple. We want a situation where we want to only show this, right? We want to show this matrix. This is the matrix, right? So on the matrix, once you have the matrix selected, ideally you're supposed to name this. We name this to be time trend, right? Time trend. So this matrix that is time trend, just close the eye here, hide this visual. So you only get to see this monthly trend. So when I select the monthly trend, I can rename this to be monthly trend, right? Great. So now I'm only seeing the monthly trend. So since it's the monthly trend is what I want to see as of this moment, I can then add a bookmark and say this is the view I want to see here, monthly trend. So add a bookmark and I'll say this should be monthly trend. So now I'm seeing monthly trend. What next? If I close the monthly trend, open the time trend, this is what I'm seeing. So now I can add another bookmark and say I want to see the time trend. So basically I have to view the monthly trend and the time trend. Both charts are actually in same position, but I can actually switch the view from monthly to time. Now I'm going to select the monthly trend here. I'll hold down my control, select the time trend. I'll right click and say I want to group these two together and I want to name them trend. So now I can create a button and just bring the button here and I can switch between monthly and time trend. So I will uncheck the bookmark, uncheck the selection. So this is what I have. I can just come to insert. Next I'll say I want to insert a button navigator. I want to insert a bookmark navigator. So this is going to be my bookmark navigator. I'll just drop it up here. I'll reduce it, just drop it up here. So if you have any issues, you can actually watch videos on YouTube on how to create bookmark. Or this should do it. So once I have it here, now I can then apply a level of formatting to this, right? I can apply some sort of formatting to this. So the bookmark button is selected. I can come to style, right? On default, right? The text, I want the text to be grayed out, meaning when nothing is selected, I want the text to be grayed out. I also want the fill to not to be white, to be this gray color. This is to tell me that it's not selected, right? So if I select the month, hold down my control, select the month, see the month is selected, right? Now, I'll come back and change this from on default to, let's just say on hover. When you hover on it, I want the font size to increase a bit to 14. So watch, if I hover on it, see the font size, it increases to 14. See the effect. So next, I'll change this to unselected. I want the font size to be 14 when it's selected, right? When it's selected, then I want the fill. Now I can say I want the fill to be blue to show that it's selected. So I'll just increase the size a bit. So this is basically what I'm trying to say. You should be able to tell now that it's actually the monthly trend you are viewing. Then if I decide to switch to time trend, you see it's actually time trend you are viewing. So you can easily just apply this to switch between the two charts, monthly trend and time trend. So finally, what we have here, if we navigate back to our report we are trying to create, what we have here is actually just the total number of transactions, that's the merchant state and the merchant city. So this is not a bookmark, we'll just walk through this now. So we have the merchant state, we have the merchant city. We are switching between transaction amount and the number of transactions. So let's quickly create that. So when we come back to our report and we come to the fact table, let's come back to the fact table now. On the fact table, we actually have the merchant city and we also have the merchant state. So some of the states are actually blank, right? They are blank. I don't really know why they are blank. So one thing I did was just to create another column called merchant state, and I said if it's blank, just replace it with unknown. So I just create a new column. And I said this should also be the merchant, what are we referring to now? Merchant state, right? This should be merchant state. and I'm simply saying if the merchant state is blank, if merchant state is blank, that means it's unknown, else it should return merchant state, right? So this it's unknown, else it should return merchant state. That's basically what I did. So I also did something for the merchant city. The merchant city, I noticed I'm seeing online, and I know online is basically not a city. So what I did was, if it's online, I also said it's unknown, else it should return the merchant city. So I'll the same principle, I'll just say a new column again. So if the merchant city, this is merchant city 2, and I'm simply saying if the merchant city is equal to online, then it's unknown, else return merchant city. Great. Else return merchant city. So if it's unknown, if it's online, unknown, else return merchant city. So that is merchant city and merchant state. Now, for us to be able to switch between amount, that's now next thing we need to do is just first let's quickly just do this. So we want to be able to switch between, we want to know the states with the highest amount, that's the top 10 states with the highest amount. Then we want to know the top 10 cities with the highest amount. At the same time, we want to switch between amount and number of transactions. Remember, we have transaction amount and we have the number of transactions. We want to be able to switch between those two measure. So let's quickly go ahead to create our parameter. We'll just come to modeling and we want to create a new parameter, fields. Now this parameter, we're going to call it transactions. Transactions. Then the two field value we're referring to is our DAX measure. Now we're looking at just the transaction amount and the transaction number. Those are the two measures we're looking at. So I'll make sure the add slicer to this page is checked, and I'll click on create. So you see what happens. We now have what do we have now? We have a slicer between transaction amount and transactions. So what we can do is change this slicer, right? I'll change this slicer to the new slicer, to this new slicer we have here. Okay, I'll just bring this here. I will come to format, right? I want to change the layout of these slicers from grid to single row, and I want it to be maximum of 2 buttons because we actually have 2 buttons here, transaction amount and number of transaction. I'll put off the title, so I'll just reduce this here and bring it here. So if you notice, immediately we created that parameter, you can see the parameter here, the table here, the parameter table here, transactions, and you can actually see we're having total transaction amount and total transactions. So I will expand, I'll select the parameter, the code for the parameter, you see it here. I'll simply just delete this total and just refer to this as transactions, that's the amount, or rather I'll just say transaction, this should be amount, then this should be okay, no, I would rather be transaction amount then transaction number. So this should be transaction number and this should be transaction amount, like this. So I can just rename it and click on OK. So once this is done, we can now create we can go ahead and create our visual for the merchant city and merchant state. So to do that now, just select our clustered bar chart, bring it down here, reduce this, expand. So this is what we're going to do. We're going to make sure one of these slicer is selected, either amount or transaction. So I'll select either amount or transaction. So I'll select this visual now, right? This slicer here for this parameter, it doesn't affect any chart here. It's just the chart we're going to use it that is going to affect. So next, I'll come to the facts table. I'll select the merchant city. That's the merchant city 2, the one we created. Or rather, let's start with state. So merchant state, the one we created, right? Then I'll come to my transactions. So I have the merchant state on the x-axis. So I'll come to my transaction, that's the parameter now. I'll carry the parameter, I'll drop it on the x-axis. I have this on my y-axis, on my y-axis, I mean. I'll drop the parameter on my x-axis. So you can look at the parameter transactions. In case you drop your transactions here and you're seeing maybe first order value, just right click, say show selected field, right? So in case you have something like this when you dropped your parameter here, right click and say show value, show value of selected field, just like this. So you have it like this. So what we're looking at now is the merchant state and the transaction amount. So if I select the number of transaction, it will change from transaction amount to merchant state and the number of transaction. So you're looking at the number of transaction as of now, number of transaction. So this is the state and number of transaction, right? So on the other hand, we also want to just have this, but this should not be referring to city and number of transaction. So I'll bring this here. I'll uncheck state from the x-axis. I will expand our fact and replace it with city. That's the city 2. So this is city 2. So basically what you're looking at now is the number of transaction by state and by city. Now, if we come back and say transaction amount, you will now be looking at the transaction amount by state and city. So one thing I think I did was select this, right? Select this, expand the filters, and I said merchant city. I selected all and looked for unknown, and I think I unchecked unknown. So just search for unknown. Search for unknown. Yeah, unknown. I think I unchecked unknown. Yeah, I unchecked unknown. So you can select the merchant state, right? And I think I also unchecked unknown here too. I unchecked unknown also. Unchecked unknown. So I know you're seeing this is queued in a way. I think one thing I did was I created another column for merchant state again. No, we already have one column, so I created another one. So basically, what I created, I can't remember. So I think let's go back to my report and see what I did actually. If I created another one or I used just one. So yeah, so for the merchant state too, I actually created a new column, right? Changing the abbreviations to the actual name of those states or country, whichever one it is. Oh damn. So this is actually really long. So I'll drop this code on the OneDrive also. I'll drop the code on the OneDrive. So let me quickly copy this code, right? Ctrl A, Ctrl C. I'll navigate back to the reports, right? So let's come to fact, transaction, merchant state, right? The merchant state now. Yeah, merchant state is the one that has the abbreviation. That's the merchant state, right? This. So the merchant state, this merchant state that we created now using this, saying if it's unknown, like we said, if it's blank unknown. So basically we need to remove this and paste the code I copied. Awesome. So one problem, this code is really long, right? And the only difference is, I think, is this F, capital F here, and data. So this is actually referring to facts, merchant state, right? Merchant state, merchant state, merchant state, like this. So this is what we have. I don't think I can copy and paste, so we're going to try something out, right? I'm just going to say Control A, I'm going to say Control C, right? I'll come to this DAX query view here, DAX query view. I'm going to simply come to the DAX query view, I'll paste the code here, right? And once I have the code here, I'm not running any code, please. I'll just say Control arrow or Control F. Yeah, so Control F, I'll say Control F. So what I want to do is I'll tell this code to find this, right? I'll say find this, then replace it with this. Yeah, replace with this. Yeah, so I'll simply say replace all. So it replaces all. Then I'll close this. Next, I'll just gently copy my code back, Control X. I'll go back to my table view and just say Control A and Control V. Great, so I have it here. I'll paste this code just the way it is here now. I'll paste it on the OneDrive also, so you don't go ahead and start writing this very, very long code. So I'll commit this, and I think that should do. So yeah, so we have the state name here now. We now have the state name, California, and all that. So now we can switch between our transaction amount and the number of transactions for state and city. So one thing you need to do, select this slicer, right? Let's just wait, quick formatting. Come to format. Make sure you have your slicer settings. Force selection is on and single select is on, so we can always make sure that one, either between transaction amount and the number of transactions, one should always be selected at every point in time. So you can either switch between transaction amount and number of transactions. So once that is done, remember, same principle. So the way we have this our slicer here, we want this one to also look just like that. So same principle, you select the slicer, come to format, then come to buttons, right? This time around buttons on default. This is button on default. So you're going to do two things actually. So buttons on default, you want the field to be gray, like gray, like this is gray on default when it's not selected. Then when it's selected, you want the field to be blue like this. So when it's selected, it should be blue. When it's not selected, it should be grayed out like this. So you can actually apply same principle to the colored value here. On default, when the colored value is on default, it should be gray, right? Then when the colored value, if you hover on it, it should go to 14, right? Just like we did before. So when you hover on it, it increases to 14. Now, if it's selected, you just increase the size to also 14. Yeah, so basically you can format these two charts, right? Format them just the way you want them to look also. So with this, we're actually done with page, that's the second page, third page of the report. We're done with the third page. So remember to change your titles. Remember to change this title here. This is no longer looking at demographics, rather we're looking at transactions, not demographics but transactions. That's what we're looking at. Remember to also change the titles here. You can look at the report I have before now, and you can change the titles there. So we have just one more page to go, and I want to, like I said, I want this video to be as short as possible. So I'm just going to now make a duplicate of one of these pages, right? I'll just select the financial health, make a duplicate of it for the last page. I'll just walk you through the last page. The last page, you can actually create it yourself. That's card details. So this is referring to card details. I'll just say this page should be card details. Card details. This is card details. Remember, I'm now going to remove everything we have here. We don't need them. I'm going to remove everything we have here. 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 I'm going to leave this card visuals here. I'm going to leave this card visuals. So once again, I'll come back to our PowerPoint, right? We have a background design for the last page. Actually, we have a background design for the last page, so I'm just going to take a snapshot of that. The background design for the last page, I'm going to take a snapshot of that. Right. I'm then going to save, and of course I'm going to save it somewhere in my desktop where I'll be able to see it. I'll navigate back to our report now. Here, while we're here, I'll just come to format, Canva background. I'll remove the one we have here now and replace it with the one I just snapped. So this is what we have. So remember now, if you come to your card details table, right? This is card details. Let's go to the table view. I'm no longer working with this. This is card details, dimension cards. So for the card detail, you have the type of card here, which is this is the type of card, right? Then you have the brand of the card, MasterCard and any other one. Then now I created the measures for the card details where the transactions, right, for the card. Then we're also looking at failed and pass. Yeah, so let's confirm that. Let's confirm that. Okay, transaction, the number of transactions and all. So let's confirm that, please. So for the last page, which is the card details, what are we actually looking at? So for the last page, which is the card detail, what we're looking at is actually the issued cards and the transactions. The issued cards and the transactions. So how many cards were issued, then the transactions that were carried out with the issued cards. So if we come back to our report here, so you can see this is actually the brand of the card, right? This is the ID, which means for each card that were issued, this ID was given out. So when we count this ID, then of course we can go ahead and you know what we do. We count first, we count the ID, then we count the ID and filter by MasterCard, count and filter to give us the issued cards. Then when we now look at the transactions carried out using these cards, right? The transactions carried out using these cards. So come to our transaction table, number of transactions in the recent. Come to our transaction table, you can actually see we have card ID here. We have card ID, which means we are able to connect this card ID to the dimension. This, you remember, this dimension card ID is connected to what now is connected to the cards using this ID we have here. So you can actually go and say transaction, then you want to filter by, that's the number of transactions, then you want to filter by when the card brand is MasterCard. So I'll just do one, then you can go ahead and do the rest and also create these visuals we have here. They are really simple visuals, they are not complex. So I'll do one, let's say MasterCard, right? So first thing I'll do is right click and say we want to create a new measure. The new measure we want to create is just count the number of cards issued, right? We want to know the number of cards issued. So we just do a distinct count. So I'll just say cards issued. So this would just be a distinct count, right? A distinct count of the cards ID. This is the cards ID. So this will tell me the cards that were issued. Okay. Now I want to know the cards that were issued by MasterCard. So for MasterCard, I'll just do card calculate cards issued, filter when the brand is MasterCard. So okay, now I'll right click, create a new measure again. So I'll just refer to this as MasterCard. So this should be MasterCard. So what I want to calculate the cards issued. I'll filter to when cards brand is equal to Master card. I hope just have to confirm the spelling is actually exact, just the way we have it there. So this is MasterCard. We have the cards issued by MasterCard. Next, let's look at the number of transactions carried out using MasterCard. So a new measure. Remember, we already have a measure for the number of transactions, which is total transaction already. So now I'm creating a new measure. Now this would be, I would say, MasterCard or master transaction. This would now be calculate also. I want to calculate the total transaction number, and I also want to filter it when card brand is equal to MasterCard. Wait, so when the card brand is also MasterCard, that's what I want to filter it to. So now I have the number of card issued for MasterCard, and I have the number of transactions for MasterCard. So what we've done now, you have to do the same thing for Visa, American Express, and every other one. So remember to select these boxes you have here and just turn off the background. So once you turn off the background, you should be able to position them, and you see your icons by the other side. Please select, turn off the background, so you see your icon clearly. Visa, select this also, turn off the background. So this is where I have my MasterCard logo, so I'm going to be using this card. So I'll just remove this total client, right? Already you can see the symbol in the MasterCard. So I'll select this card visual. First, on the build, I want to make sure that this is no longer referring to client, rather is referring to okay, so yeah, total transaction by MasterCard. Let's be sure. So transaction amount by MasterCard. Yes, we've not done that, so we need to also do that. So while we're here, we need to create another measure. We need to create one more measure and say new measure. Now this is going to be master. This is going to be master amount. That's the transaction amount now. So I'm going to say calculate once more. This is now referring to transaction amount, right? And I'm also going to filter when the card detail or the card brand is equal to MasterCard. MasterCard. So I have when the card brand is MasterCard amount, the number of transactions and the issued card. So you create the same thing for Visa, Discover, and American Express. So when I have this card visual selected, I'll just master transaction amount. That's the data, right? This is transaction amount. I'll then come to format, like we've always done. I'll just come to the colored value, change this to master amount, and this should be 30, right? I also want to put off the label. I want the amount to be display unit to be none, decimal places to be 0. Then I want the transaction amount to be in dollars. So once I've done these things, right, I can then come back, scroll up, come to reference label. Now, reference label, I'm going to add two things, right? Two things. One is the master issued card. That's the master issued card. This is MasterCard issued card. Then I'm going to add the master transaction. That's the number of transactions carried out using MasterCard. So next, I'll increase the size like we've done, 16. The value expand 16. Next, I'll come select MasterCard. This is referring to what? Issued card. So I'll see custom. Now I'll see issued card. Next, I'll come to the value and say display unit should be none. decimal places should be 0, right? Then for the issued card, which is the MasterCard here, I would add a comma, so you can actually see a little comma separation. So once I'm done with that, the next thing I'll do is come up again and switch from MasterCard to transaction. The field should be also custom, so this would now be referring to transactions. I would name these transactions. That's transactions. This will be the value again. I'll come to display unit should be none. This should be 0. Then of course the transaction, which is MasterCard transaction, I'll just put a comma. So you have it this way. So now you can easily see the transaction amount, the cards that were issued, and the total transactions, number of transactions that have been carried out using MasterCard. So let's compare this to what I have here. So what I have here is 3371, and you can actually see it. So I think this is filtered. If it's not filtered, so issued cards is 471, right? Issued cards is 471. So I have to be sure this is 82,000. Okay, let's confirm that please. 82. Issued card is actually 471. So let's confirm the MasterCard. Let's confirm that because that value is wrong. So MasterCard. So we're calculating the issued card brand. Okay, so each card actually have an ID, right? So when we come to the cards, this is actually the ID of the card, and we did a distinct card. This is Master Card. Hope I spelled it well. Yeah, I think I spelled it well. I think I spelled it well. Let's be sure because little issue. I spelled it well. I saw something filtering my reports now before now. I need to be sure if there's nothing filtering this report. I don't think there's anything filtering this report. So why am I having 471? 471. Let me be sure. Okay. MasterCard. Okay, so I said MasterCard. What did I do? I said calculate cards. So I have cards. So let me be sure. Cards, distinct count. Okay, so I counted the cards from the what is it called? From the fact table, not the dimension card details table. But I think both of them is supposed to give us same number. I counted the card, so let me just confirm this, right? Okay, yeah. So this is actually right. Oh, this is wrong. Which one? So let's confirm. Ideally, if we look at our card table, right? This is our card table. And this is the ID of the card. So on this card, we actually have, for every card issue, this is the ID for the card issue. But there's a possibility that not all the cards that have been issued have been used for a transaction. That possibility is there. So basically, look at now, it's telling me this column I selected, this table, we have 6146 rows, right? 6,146 rows. And we have 6,146 distinct values. That's this very column I selected. See, once I select this column, you see now 6,146 distinct values. So this value is correct because in the transaction, the card ID, not all the cards have actually been used to perform transaction. Remember that we have some clients that are actually having zero debt, which means they've not used their card to perform any transaction. So this is right. This is correct. So what we've done now, you do the same thing for Visa, same thing for American Express and Discover. Then you go ahead and create your KPI card. For the other part, these are just simple, what is it called? They are just simple bar charts you need to create. You don't really need to do much there. There's nothing much to do there. Just read what I have here and you can just go ahead and create your bar chart. So one thing I will do here, this is talking about the top 10 clients. I think I don't want to have this visual here anymore. Rather, what I would want to have here is the errors and the transactions. So what I'm basically saying is I'll change that chart to, let's say I'm using a clustered column chart, right? I'll just bring that here. What I'll do is I want to see the transactions, number of transactions, right? Number of transactions. And I want to see the errors. So I'll come to the fact and look at the errors. This is what I want to. But then I'll remove the blank. Remember, the blank means there's no error. So I'll expand the filters pane, come to errors, and select up and check the blank. So basically, this is what I'm referring to. So you can actually go ahead and do whichever one you feel is okay. Insufficient balance is actually a major type of error. So you can go ahead and create every other one. I think I would want to stop here. If you have any issue, you can reach out to me on LinkedIn, on Twitter. On LinkedIn is the easiest way to reach out to me. Just send me a message. We can actually go through anything if you have any issue. I'll paste all the code I said I was going to paste. I'll leave them on the OneDrive so you can always get access to them. Then remember, once you have your page or your 4 pages created like this, the next thing you need to do is just come to insert, come to buttons and say navigator, page navigator. So you can bring your page navigator like this. So next you can change the style, right? Not style now. Grid, change this to vertical. This to vertical and just bring it here. That's the next thing I did. Yeah. So you can go ahead and format using the style just the way we did before now, selected when it's not selected and all that. So with that, you should be done with the report. I know you're going to say you saw a funnel up here. So that funnel is just the clear all slicers. So you can actually use your, so in case you have any slicer selected, you can use clear all slicer. So you can get a funnel using the icon, bring a funnel icon, then tie that to clear all slicers. So with that, we're done with the reports. If you have any issue, like I said, you can reach out to me on LinkedIn. Thank you very much. Till next time. Bye for now.